Hello and welcome to this class on how to edit a novel. Thank you so much for joining me as we dispel the fears and the apprehensions that so often come with the process of editing. And I find those concerns amplified when it comes to novels because they are so big and they are such a meaty tome. And editing in the past was always something that made me nervous, and I found that it was just purely down to my lack of understanding, which caused that fear. I find that whenever you feel scared or nervous or anxious about anything when it comes to writing, the best way to overcome it is to dive into the challenge, learn as much as you can, and just practice, practice, practice. That is all it is. Hard work will get you there. And that's what I did with editing. I spent a lot of time editing fiction of all lengths, but novels most of all. And outside of my writing life, I also work as a copy editor, and I have done for the past 3 years. So I've picked up other things and other skills along the way. I understand the challenge that editing brings, and there are quite a few. And I've developed a process, an efficient process, because I'm not someone who has an awful lot of free time. Um, I've developed my own methods, which have proven effective and most importantly, time efficient. And this is what we're going to take a look at today, if the slideshow works. So first of all, we're gonna have a look at what these challenges of editing are, because there are a few, all different ones, different challenges for everybody. So I think it's important we cover them all. And then we're going to also look at the different types of editing, because it's not there's all different stages and different parts to the process, which we'll see today. And we're also going to look at various approaches to both writing and editing a novel, because sometimes they do coincide. Sometimes people edit as they go. We're going to have a little look at that as well. And next, I'm going to show you some one simple, very simple way to overcome psychological obstacles when it comes to editing a novel. And then we're going to look at my 3-round method, as I call it, to editing. And you can apply this to any type of or any length of fiction, really. But we will focus predominantly on novels today. After that, I'll go over some things to keep in mind when you are editing. We'll also look at working with editors, and we'll before we finish, we'll look at editorial tools like Grammarly and Hemingway, and lastly finish with a Q&A. So the way these workshops work, if you've never been to one before, I record these in advance so that I can answer any questions you may have along the way. So I'm in the chat, just fire away any questions. We'll also answer them at the end, but if you've got any sort of specific questions to anything we discuss, I'm on hand to answer them questions. Right, let's get stuck in. Before we do, I just wanted to say a few things about where you can find more support, more editorial help, and also a few of the things you can find in the description of this video. First of all, you get a free copy of a fantasy writer's handbook. So if you like writing fantasy, to be honest, if you just like writing any type of fiction, about 70% of that book or 60% of that book is just general writing help. So it covers everything from like creating characters, conflict, plot, to more specific things to do with fantasy, like weapons and armor and battles and all them kind of things. I've also got a section on getting published and what to do after you finish your writing. If you like podcasts, I have my own podcast called the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. It's again, it's a bit of a fantasy focus, but we do have episodes that focus more on generally on writing. So I think one of our episodes on dialogue is one of the most popular episodes we've ever had. So there you go. If you go to Patreon, again, there's a link for this in the description. You can support what we do, basically helping us to help you. So you can find lots of writing classes on there, interviews, you get free books and all kinds of resources. And lastly, join our writing group, because this is one of the best ways to get better at writing and to find like-minded people. So we're mostly on Facebook. Well, I say mostly, it's mostly on Discord now. Discord is brilliant. I've started using it just purely for this group, and it's just fantastic. Just instant chat. And I think there's about 250 of us in the Facebook group, and probably about over 100 now in the Discord group, I think. We're going to start doing monthly events on the Discord group as well. So the more people that join, the better. Right. The challenges of editing a novel. I think we can probably group the challenges into a few sort of a few key things. First of all, there's always that psychological or that motivational obstacle. When you write a novel, it's like 100,000 words plus, yeah, maybe 80,000 minimum. Now, when it comes to going back through that after you've finished writing it, it can feel like a bit of a chore. And I can relate a lot to this at the very moment, because I am editing a novel. It is about 100,000 words long. And yeah, I found it a bit difficult to motivate myself sometimes, especially when there's so much else going on, so much to do. And it does slip down the pecking order. And I think that probably is a psychological thing, because I am someone who does struggle to motivate myself at times. I do procrastinate. And I've also got that fear, I think a lot of writers have it, of failure, and also a bit of imposter syndrome as well, like lack of belief. And I think a lot of people get that. So I find when it comes to editing a novel, it's 100,000 words. It's going to take ages. I think first novel that was published, that took about a year to edit. And aiming to have this one done within a year, and that is writing part-time. We'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. But it also comes from a lack of clear understanding of what to do. What is the best approach? Again, we're going to dive into that. Another challenge I find is organisational. Depending on your story, you might have a really large cast of characters, each with their own unique or interweaving storylines. So it can be easy to become ensnared in that crazy web that you've created for yourself. We'll also go over some ways to keep things organized. One challenge that some writers might face is feeling the urge to just rush through the editing process. And I can totally understand why, because you might spend well over a year writing a book. You just want to share it. You're so proud of your achievements. You just want to get it out there, and you want to, I don't know, just get it out there. So the problem is, if you skip on editing, it's not going to be, well, chances are it's not going to be the best it can be. And that's going to only damage you in many ways, because publishers aren't going to appreciate a book that doesn't quite make sense, or there's plot holes, or if it's got grammatical and spelling mistakes. They want books, and the same goes for readers if you self-publish. And people want books that they feel like you've invested a lot of time and effort, and the least you can do is to check for typos and grammatical errors, because it in a way, readers will take it as a sort of slight, like a bit disrespectful, that you're going to take money off them for a product that isn't finished. It's like buying a painting from an artist, and they've just penciled out the outline. There's no color to it. And that is essentially what editing is. It's we'll get into it. It's where the real writing is done, because yeah, well, I'll come to that. I won't get distracted. But yeah, it's that urge to rush, and that can damage people. And yeah, editing can be laborious. It can be mentally and emotionally taxing, but it's immensely rewarding when it does pay off. And it's this sense of satisfaction that comes from tying things up in neat little bows, or working out problems with your story. And for that, you need to have a good approach of how to edit a novel. And this ties in with the last one, knowing where to start, because in the past I've just finished the story, gone back to the beginning, started reading over it line by line. And yeah, you obviously change things and make them better, but you're not really stepping far back enough away from the story. You're getting bogged down in prose, whereas there might be a gaping problem with the character. Like the character might not be likable. So and this ties in with what my approach is, this 3-round approach, and the first round in particular, which is focusing on the major points of a story. And these are characterisation, creating characters, the conflict of the story, the theme, and the plot. So when I was editing, just going through line by line, I can't really honestly say that I was taking a step back to think, does this work? Does this work? Analyzing things, and with this particular focus on these elements, I was getting drawn in to how pretty my writing was. And I suppose when you're writing your first novel, you need to learn a lot. It's a bit of a sort of proving ground, a training match, you could say. You practice and you're learning, and you learn a lot about your writing. So you should always have that freedom in your first draft to just to try things and to write experimentally with your prose. But for me, I was finding that it was all style and no substance. So that's not what you want. If you're new to the editing process, you may do this as well. You may be in the game a while, and you may still do this, as we'll see. I've got some great quotes from one of my favorite editors, Solstein, and he says all writers do it. So don't feel like you're alone or feel self-conscious about anything, because like I say, I did it for years and people still do. So when we write and we want to be writers and we want to be successful, you've got to have this mindset of constantly learning, constantly growing. Every day you're going to learn something new. When I interview writers for the company I work for, one question I always ask them is, my mind's blank. I always ask them essentially is, what is your approach to writing and feedback? Are you always looking to get better, or are you content with what you do? And my view is the moment that you think, or you're satisfied that you're a great writer, is the moment you become a bad writer, because you stop learning, you stop growing, and you become complacent and sloppy. So onwards and upwards, and we're going to move on to the different types of editing, because there are different focuses you can take, which ties into this 3-round approach. But I just wanted to give you a rundown of some of the terminologies, because we will refer to these kind of words throughout the class. And when you're looking to work with editors as well, you've got to know what there are different kinds of editors. Like, one editor isn't going to do every role, isn't going to edit the full novel on every level, unless you're willing to pay mega bucks. Again, come to that later. So first up, we've got the developmental editing, and this is sometimes called conceptual editing. It's all about the process of bringing the pieces of the story together, and basically big picture stuff. So again, we were talking about before, are your characters engaging? Is their journey compelling? Do they change, or do they develop in some way? And is the outcome satisfying? look at conflict and major plot events as well. Now, if you're struggling to bring these ideas together in a sort of coherent form, then a developmental editor or focus on developmental editing could be the way to fix them. Next up, we've got structural editing, which this type of editing is also known as evaluation editing, and it's quite similar to developmental editing, but it involves looking at the novel to assess its overall structure, its flow, and general quality as well. So again, it's looking at the broader picture rather than the finer details. Next, we've got content editing. This is where we start to dig into the words on the page and how they're used and how the story progresses. It's a more all-encapsulating type of editing because it does consider things like structure, maybe a bit of the developmental side, and it also looks at things like tone and voice. It also has a bit of an overlap with the next type of editing on the list, which is line editing, which, as you can probably guess, it just involves going through your piece line by line to provide a detailed edit on how to make that lovely prose of yours sing. This probably falls into place a bit further down the line, so it will be classed as round 2 of the 3 round approach. And again, it looks at things like word usage, sentence structure, fluidity, and yeah, it just it's quite fun. This is where you can sort of really get into it. Copy editing. This is, we're sort of inching towards the end of the process when we get to copy editing, because it's more going through the manuscripts with a fine-tooth comb and looking for spelling mistakes, grammar, probably changing any sort of sentences that could be improved. And I'm telling you now, there's always something that slips through the net. Just wait until you publish a novel and you read the first page once you got them all printed, and you'll be like, oh my God, what have I done? And lastly, we've got proofreading, and this is the last type of editing. So this is where you catch all those little mistakes before it goes to print. Nowadays, if you're self-publishing, you're also looking for formatting issues as well. Very important, because you want to create a quality product that people are going to love. So I wanted to include this in this workshop because I've been speaking to a lot of people in the writing group lately about the process of writing. How do you write a novel? And I feel like it does tie in with editing as well, because when we approach editing, some people like to go, editors, they go along. And now it's not the approach I'd take, but with writing, it's whatever works for you. There's no right way. And that's one of the beautiful things about it, because if this is all just advice, you don't have to listen to anything I say today. You might just find like one little bit useful. But if that helps you form your own approach and it works for you, then you're on to a winner. So now editing as you go along is I know a lot of famous writers do it as well, perfectionists. And so what you'd do is you'd spend a day writing, and then the following day you'd spend editing what you wrote the day before. It can be a bit slow. Well, some will say it's slow, but if you are a fast editor, if you spend one day editing and you edit everything, then you're going to be, when it's finished, you're not spending all that time editing again on top of the time you've written. So it does depend though, because sometimes people get really bogged down in this editing process. I have tried it a bit myself, and yeah, I find I get stuck, and then I get frustrated because I'm not making any progress. And that's what you want with your first draft. You want to feel a sense of progress, because like I say, you're editing. Well, you're writing 80 plus 1,000 words. That's a lot, and there's if you set yourself daily targets, you're under pressure to hit them targets. So yeah, I just preferred another approach. But so this is why I wanted to go on to it, because if you're unsure how to approach writing a novel, because this was the hold up when I was speaking to a lot of people, they were like, well, do you have to perfect the chapter and then move on? Well, no, because as you get further down the line, things might change in the story. Then you've got to go back and change those early chapters that you've spent ages editing. So I just think get it all out. First draft for me should just be you telling yourself the story. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't quite make sense, because you might not understand what happens until the very end. Likewise, you're still getting to know your characters. Yeah, yes, you can spend loads of time creating them and designing them, but until you put them through the tests that you place in their path for them when you're writing that novel, you're not going to really know how they're going to react, and whether the reactions that you initially thought are compelling to the reader. And they also might surprise you. Like, it does sound weird when you tell sort of non-writers that oh yeah, I was writing the scene, but I had them going in my mind it was going in one direction, and then the character took it in another direction. And it's true, because if you follow the right approaches, like we've discussed in other workshops, you can create characters that feel alive. And yeah, I think they do surprise you. So you've always got to bear that in mind. And that's why I like to just go, all right, a bit of an approach. We'll organize to a certain extent, and then 50-50, maybe 60-40 in terms of organized, and then 40%, 50% just see where it goes. Have that freedom, because that's what a first draft should be about. It's all about unshackling your mind and having that creative freedom just to see what happens, and getting it all out there without worrying about quality or if it doesn't quite make sense. Yeah, so keep the two processes distinct, I think. Drafting, writing, whatever. And then once that's done, move on to editing, because editing, it's a completely different frame of mind. And that's a difficult thing. If you're editing as you go along, you've got to change your mindset from being free and unburdened to all of a sudden following rules and guidelines and whatnot. Before we dive into this 3-round approach, I know we've started to flirt with the points of it. I just wanted to talk about the psychological challenges and one way that I learned to overcome them. And it was sort of, I sort of learned this inadvertently, because when I was publishing Pariah's Lament, or writing Pariah's Lament, the publisher, or the original publisher, they had in mind sort of like this Amazon Vela. So they were going to release the novel in 10 parts. So it would have been 10 episodes. They were calling them episodes. So because it was in 10 episodes, I decided to write it in 10 episodes. I mean, it just reads like a novel, but it's sort of broken down into 10 chunks, about 10,000 words each. And yeah, when I was writing it, I actually wrote it really quickly, because I wasn't thinking about writing 100,000 words. I was thinking about writing 10,000. And that is, I can write 10,000 words. And if I'm doing part-time, I can do that in 2 weeks, easy. So then I was thinking, yeah, I can write 20% of a novel in a month. So it's only going to take me 5 months to write a novel. And when you think of it like that, you're like, oh yeah, it's quite easy actually. Like, I say this to writers in work. If you've got a target to write 1,500 words a day, you divide that by 7.5 hours or 7.5. It's like 300 or 400 words an hour. Now, I don't know what, I mean, we're all professional writers. I'm sure you can do 300-400 words in an hour. When you look at it like that, it's probably even less than that. It's probably like 200 or 300 words. I'm not very good at maths. That's why I'm a writer. But you see what I'm saying? When you break down, it's strange. You just got to trick yourself. When you restructure things in your mind to make them seem or feel manageable, it's well easier, honestly. But at the same time, you've got to appreciate the time that you've got available. And if you feel like you haven't got much time, you might feel a bit more under pressure. And then you start to lose interest or you get frustrated. And so, yeah, if you break them down to chunks, like short stories, like I enjoy writing short stories because I know I can do it quickly. Nowhere near as long to draft, a few thousand words. You can do that in a couple of days. Editing, you spend a lot longer on it. And one of the best ways I recommend doing this is just to go for an even 10, because chances are if your book's 80,000 plus words, divide that by 10, you're looking at 8,000 words. That's even better. That doesn't seem like anything at all if you're just doing it in 8,000 words. Even like a 110,000, 11,000 words doesn't seem too bad. I mean, you can go over it, especially when you draft them. But as I'm going through and editing this novel now, I'm just breaking it down into 10,000 words, and I might just stop. I try and round it up to a chapter, of course, but not too far ahead so that you don't get too dissuaded. I just feel more at ease when I approach it like this, and I'll get stuck into it more. I don't feel like don't print off the whole manuscript. I've got this wedge of paper sitting there in front of me looking at me thinking, bloody hell, like leafing through it, it doesn't even feel like you're getting anywhere at all. But if you just print off a few pages, there you go. I'm the master of tricking myself. Right, onto the 3 rounds of editing. Round 1, I'm going to say this again, first drafts are shit, because this was Hemingway's quote. There's no pressure at all with the first draft. The reason why I brought this up is because I'm going to refer to a guy called Solstein now, who's a master editor and a very, very good writer as well in his own right. And I've got a few quotes from Steen, just to give you a bit of an idea of writing as a whole and editing as a whole. Also, I recommend Steen on Writing, his book, absolutely fantastic. If you didn't want to get the book, don't worry, because I'm going to discuss some of his teachings here. And this is his quote, or a quote I've taken from the book, about his view on the editing process. I've never encountered a writer who achieved a fully perfected manuscript in first draft. In fact, the majority of published writers write first drafts that are riddled with craft errors and embarrassingly bad writing compared to the version that finally sees print. They know that writing is truly rewriting, which is sort of what I said before. The real writing takes place with editing. But as Steen continues, even some of the most experienced authors are not aware of a better way of revising than repeatedly staring at page 1 and going through it till the end. Yeah. So as you sort of get in a vibe here, Steen doesn't think this is the best approach, and this is what we do. We attend to major matters first, as I suggested before. We focus on the elements vital to the life of the story, the character, the conflict, the theme, and the plot. And this is what Steen suggested, just to focus on major matters first. And he likened it, which I think is a very good way of thinking about it, as triaging. He said battlefield hospitals, but it applies to all hospitals. So triage, if you're unfamiliar, that is where usually you get asked a few questions about how you're feeling, what symptoms you've got. There'll be a few sort of basic tests done to check your vitals. And at that point, the healthcare professionals will be more aware of your condition and will prioritize you accordingly. If you come in with 8 gunshot wounds, you're going to be treated as a priority as opposed to someone who's just sprained their ankle getting out of bed. So and this is what we've got to do. We've got to prioritize just like we would in a hospital. So let's look at character, because I think character is probably the most important. And first of all, Steen recommends, when it comes to sort of thinking analytically about your characters, he recommends asking some of these questions. Might seem weird, but they are brilliant. Getting to understand whether it's something at the bottom here, whether we've developed a character that we want to spend time with. Because when we ask people to read our novels or buy our novels, they're going to be, it's a time commitment. They're going to be spending a lot of time with your characters. And if they're not likable or interesting in some way, then chances are they're not going to stick it out till the end. So there are some questions that Steen recommends asking, and this helps us give us this understanding. And number one is, what do you like about your character? It's quite a straightforward one, but if you just think about your protagonist, even your antagonist, like, what do you like about them? What's the one feature that makes them interesting? Are your characters' traits distinct from and unique from others? So this is, if we all make characters that sort of blend into one another, they're not really memorable, and they're not, you get bored. So just imagine yourself at a party with your characters. If they're all the same, you're gonna get bored. You're having to get drunk, so drunk through boredom that you pass out, or you just go home. Because yeah, that you need someone who's gonna stand out, someone who's gonna grab people's attention and live long in the memory. And we don't have to do this with all characters, but this is what we've got to do. It sort of ties in with the next one. We've got to, would you willingly spend time with your characters? And if not, can you give that character some eccentric detail? So did he wear certain type of clothes? Did he insist on wearing a particular type of hat? Or having the haircut in a certain way? Like any sort of trivial thing. Another question that Steen recommends we ask is, how well do you understand your characters? And this you might think it's the same as what you like about your character, but it's not, because once I will come to a writer shortly called Lejos Igri, who was a Hungarian playwright. He was massive on building characters that really stuck in people's minds. And there's a free YouTube video that I've recorded on this channel called How to Create Lifelike Characters. And in it, I discuss Igri's method. It's called the bone structure. And this helps you create 3-dimensional characters that feel alive. And Igri's, there's always a quote that stuck with me. He said, it's not enough to know what your character wants for breakfast. You have to understand why they want it. And it's just, yeah, just absolutely nailed it for me. Steen also suggests something to give you an idea of how well you understand your character. And it's a bit of a contemporary one. So if you're writing fantasy, you may not find this applicable, but you get the gist. If you were friends with your character and you won the lottery, how would your character react to your news? Would they be jealous? Would they start being all friendly all of a sudden, extra friendly, looking for a bit of a a handout, or we just carry on as normal? Would they congratulate you, want to celebrate with you? Like all different reactions, and money does change people, so it's a really good test of how well you know your character. And lastly, does your character change in the story? Again, Steen and Egri both believe that as characters move through the sort of the points of conflict in your story, they should grow and develop, either negatively or positively, but there needs to be some kind of change, especially in a piece of fiction so long. Moving on to villains, it's important if when you've got a protagonist, there's always an antagonist, and it's really important to be aware of what's driving your villain. Are they just morally bad, or badly behaved? I mean, morally bad villains can make for interesting reads, as they just believe wholeheartedly that their actions are justified. So this is where we start getting like the morally great characters. And this leads us to the next point: is which is your villain interested in? Generally, these characters that sort of you aren't sure where they are, I suppose, on the spectrum, but what they're doing is wrong. A bit like Walter White in Breaking Bad. This makes them interesting. They may also have some kind of charm or charisma. They may hold a position of power, of influence, or they may have considerable wealth. If you're struggling to create an attractive villain, that sounds simple, but try and look at them through the eyes of someone who loves them. So I always think of cult leaders, because when you're on the outside, we can see that they're bad people, they're doing bad things, that they're manipulating people and influencing them. But to that person who's part of the cult, they idolize their leader. So I think if you're really struggling to get in that mindset, watch something like that, some kind of extreme example, just to get an idea of what it would be like to idolize a really horrible bastard. If you're having I would say think about your minor characters too. And although the minor, they may just feature in one sentence or a paragraph or one chapter, it's always important to make sure they've been sufficiently developed. They obviously don't need to be fully fleshed out, but like I was saying before about looking for the uniqueness, everyone is unique, and although some people do blend into one another, most of the time it's just we haven't got to know them enough to uncover that sort of detail that makes them stand out, that makes them memorable. And if we can do this as writers, then we only obviously get a snapshot, and we don't get a full chance to develop these minor characters. But if they have a feature or some kind of thing that makes them stand out to the reader, and a good way to do this is using the senses, because we remember things a lot through our senses. Just imagine, for example, you're walking down the street and you smell bacon bread. So what is the first thing that comes to your mind? It's like you just jolt memories into your head. So we can use things like bad breath. The character might have bad breath, you may have bad body odor, or maybe when a character shakes your protagonist's hand, they've got rough and coarse hands from working or laboring or something like that. So these extra details help make even the minor characters stand out. Conflict next. Conflict is massive to a story. If you're ever struggling to work your way out of a plot hole, just think about putting obstacles in people's path. Or if you're struggling to work out where to go next, just put obstacles in people's path and see what happens. Obviously, it's not as simple as that. But we'll come back to Egri, and he absolutely adored conflict. He said it was basically the Titanic atomic energy, whereby one explosion creates a chain of explosions, and it is essentially the heartbeat of a story. It's the reason we keep reading, and it's as necessary to storytelling as oxygen is to our survival. It's weird because when we think about conflict, usually we hate conflict in our lives, we just want to avoid it. But when it comes to entertainment or fiction, watching TV shows, films, if there's no conflict, we're just not engaged, we're bored, and it's quite weird. So conflicts in short are obstacles or challenges our characters have to overcome to achieve their ultimate goal, which is usually the end of the story. Now, conflicts are obstacles. They can be people, like antagonists. They can be physical obstacles, like I said there, like being enslaved, or mental challenges like anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder. And just to give you an idea of how important conflict is and how common it is in a story as well. I just wanted to just give a quick example from Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring in particular. And from the point that the Fellowship is formed and sets off from Rivendell, there's 5 things that happen. And when you take a step back and you look at it like this, you realize how this happens quite quickly and quite significantly. Number 1, as they're crossing the mountains, on the way out of Rivendell, are spotted by Saruman's crows, which he uses to spy across the land. So knowing that, they're forced to take a different path over the mountain, which is a much more dangerous path. And Saruman is aware of this and starts using magic to bring down the mountain. He succeeds and forces them down into the mines of Moria. Outside Moria, the Fellowship is attacked by a giant octopus. Before that, they can't get into the door. So that's another point of conflict. Then as they're trying to get into the door, they're attacked by a giant octopus. God knows how that octopus survives there. We don't go into that. Probably let's just assume it's a magical beast. Someone can correct me if you've read the Silmarillion or something like that. Then once they're in the mines of Moria, they're attacked by goblins and the Balrog. And I won't say the next point, but if you've seen, you know exactly what happens, because it is just too big of a spoiler. But what the point I'm trying to make here is that the story is absolutely riddled with conflict and it keeps us engaged. And one of the best methods I use to check conflict levels in a story is something I devised myself, and it's called character plotting. Which character plotting is, when I sort of explain it to you, you probably think that's quite simple. You might even do it yourself. I just put a name to it just for my own sake. And character plotting is the mapping out of the story using characters' emotional journeys as they wrangle with conflict. We're looking at the thoughts, the feelings, desires, all as events unfold. So it's quite simple. As characters interact with points of conflict, we just chart their emotional response on a graph, X and Y. Nice simple graph. A negative outcome sees the line fall, and a positive outcome to that point of conflict sees the line go up. It's as simple as that. Why do we focus on these emotions? Because we're gonna draw on these playwrights of the 20th century because they were so clued up. And Moses Malavinsky, in his book, The Science of Playwriting, he said, emotion, or the elements in or of an emotion, constitute the basic things in life. Emotion is life, life is emotion, and therefore emotion is drama, drama is emotion. So it's like full circle, like we are creatures of emotion, and that's what we want to read and see reflected in our stories. That's the theory anyway. And Egri, he echoes this by saying emotion is as necessary to a story as barking is to a dog. And yet, to be honest, the stories, the films I love most are the ones that I have an emotional connection with, the ones where I'm crying or I'm laughing. I have this emotional reaction. And um, yeah, these are stories we want to write. And it's really important as our characters move through these life-changing events that we drag them through. We wanna really get to grips with the highs, the lows, the anxieties, the uncertainties, the pressure to perform and succeed. We feel these things as well. We want to see that reflected in our characters. Otherwise, they're just a bit flat. And let's be honest, you're going to put your characters through hell and back. So it's really important to plot their emotional journey to make sure that it's a genuine experience. And it helps you get to grips with every swing of emotion, because there's always things that you miss, especially when you've got you're thinking about everything, you're thinking about like dialogue, you're thinking about sentence structures. When you're drafting, you do tend to focus more on other areas, and you always need to go back to make sure that you've nailed number one. Sorry, the recording paused there. Some sort of computer error. So I did temporarily lose my place. So another benefit of character plotting is that it gives you a visual overview of your story and the points of conflict that emerge throughout. So one of the benefits I think this gives is that it really does help you understand and identify any sort of flat or dull parts. And this allows you to add obstacles for your characters to overcome. So let's just look at that Lord of the Rings example. If they just went from Rivendell to Moria, it would have been boring. It would just cut that out of the film, definitely. Same if they manage to get over the mountain, no problem, no questions asked. It's just boring. So there needs to be something a bit more interesting. I mean, I'm a fantasy writer, so I tend to have stories that involve long physical journeys, and not much happens when you're just writing A to B. You need to come up with something a bit more interesting. So in Pariah's Lament, which is my novel, one of the protagonists, Izzy, she has to travel a significant distance. So what I decided to do was introduce some extra conflicts to make that journey a bit more interesting. And I identified this as a problem area by using my method, character plotting, this visual thing. I'm going to come to this visual thing next because it's quite handy, the graph. But it allowed me to work out that there was no it was a flat part of the story. There was no turmoil, and there's a good chance I was going to lose readers at that point. So, added a little bit, and jobs are good. So it seems quite simple. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of character plotting. We've spoken a lot about the theory. So as a character interacts with the points of conflict, we chart their emotional response. And like we said in the previous slide, the negative outcome sees the line fall, positive outcome sees it rise. Here is the graph that I created for both the characters in the story, Izzy and Edvard. These are the two protagonists in Pariah's Lament. So, well, first of all, we look at Izzy. So Izzy is a character who's at the very bottom. Life's is pretty shit. She's got a birthmark on her face. Everyone thinks she's cursed. She's got no mates. Even her mum and dad don't really like her. So life's pretty crap for Izzy. She just likes reading books on it and like escaping to quiet places on her own, and just escaping into books as well. So yeah, she's just a bit, yeah. Anyway, Izzy gets kidnapped by a big amphibious looking man. Never seen anything like this before. It's called Neomast. It's like a forgotten race of people in the land of Soria. And Izzy's obviously terrified. She doesn't know what's going on. She can't communicate with these people. So her line just decreases, even though it was already pretty bad. She's now being kidnapped by some monster man, and she's being carried away somewhere that she doesn't quite know. But she learns that they've actually kidnapped her because they need her help. And she finds that she quite likes these people. They're a lot better than her own race of people. So things get better for Izzy, and as the story goes on, things do gradually get better. So these little red dots are the points of conflict, and Izzy overcomes these points of conflict, and learns and grows as a result. When the line rises, obviously things go wrong, but generally, airline is one of growth. And yeah, that's Izzy's story. Edvar is a very different story, um, different character arc. So Edvar's at the very top. He's the advisor to the equivalent of the king. It's called the keeper, and his story is all a fall from grace and his redemption. So he has a massive fall, as you can see, and then it's all about his rise back to the top. So how do we do this yourself? So that's 4 steps I recommend. So create your character, give them a goal. What do they want more than anything else? Which is the end of your story. And then just create a chart like Izzy and Edvar. On the left-hand side of the chart, add the starting points. Maybe near the top or the bottom, depending on where that character starts and what kind of an arc you want to give them. And just move through the points of conflict in your plot, add them to the chart. Usually when I'm doing this on paper, I'll write little notes about what happens. If it's positive outcome, line goes up, negative outcome, line goes down. Yeah, and just keep working through, just adding notes and analyzing, see, well, this part is a bit weak. So, well, for example, I was doing this the other night, and I was thinking about character, and I was like, well, this character, we don't really know enough about them yet, so I need to develop them in this chapter. So for this chapter, I did a simple graph like this, and I was like, well, where is the opportune point that I can add in a little bit of character development? This is what I want to say. This is what I want to reveal. Write it all out. Then I'll look on the graph. I'll say, all right, this is a good point for this. Bang, there you go. And yeah, it does change the graph, and it just flows a lot better. So that's basically character plotting. Nice and simple, nice and visual as well. Always helpful. If you've got a whiteboard, always nice to do it on a whiteboard. And this ties in to another key element of the story, which is plot. I haven't got too much to say on plot because we've generally covered it with conflict and character, because the plot is essentially the sequence of events plus your character motivations, and the plot develops out of conflicts which affect the characters. So as our characters engage with points of conflict, their reactions and efforts to overcome them become the plot. And character plotting really does help with making sure that there are no sagging middle bits, which a lot of people always complain about when they're reading books, that it just dies off, gets boring. Because if you do detect any flat bits, you can liven up your plot by adding obstacles, points of conflict. So there's not much more to say on plots because it just sort of organically comes from character conflict. We'll go on to theme, which is the last consideration in this round 1. And theme or premise, if you want to call it that, is essentially it's the point of your story. It's the reason we're writing the book, the purpose you've given yourself to finish this wordy beast of a book. Essentially, it's the argument that you want to put across, the conviction you want to make, and the plot, the characters, the conflict, they're all just vehicles for you getting you there to the end to prove your point. And one of the best ways, I always struggle with theme for years, Egri, come back to him again, he explained theme to me in a very, very good way. For him, it was the framework that structured the whole story, because you can't, it depends how much weight you want to put on your theme. Historically, I think theme is very important. It still is very important, but especially in fantasy genre, there's a big move towards characters and more sort of inner things, like internal struggles, and less sort of scope on the wider themes like good versus evil and stuff like that. People get a bit bored of it. But Igri was adamant that you had to come up with your theme first. Now, I don't think that you need to come up with your theme first, but it does help because it gives you structure for the rest of your story. Let's look at if you want to come up with your own sort of theme and premise, or try and define it as you go along, because that's something that I also do. Here's a good little formula, because so your theme should have three main elements according to Igri: character, conflict, and conclusion. It needs to have all three. So as an example, let's look at Romeo and Juliet. Theme of that story is great love defies even death. So if we break that down and look at the character, the conflict, and the conclusion, great love represents character, defies suggests conflict, and death is our conclusion. So as we're editing our novels, it's really important to have our premise in mind, and especially as we're working on these major matters, when we come to like the likes of conflict, we've got to keep asking ourselves, is this helping to prove the premise? So if we look at Romeo and Juliet, if Romeo simply accepted that he wasn't going to be with Juliet, and instead he decides to run off, join the army, and just write love letters to Juliet, yeah, he might go off to war, and we might be worried about him dying and coming back as a war hero and finding Juliet, winning her heart or whatever. Yeah, that's a different kind of conflict. But when we're trying to sort of prove this specific premise, we're not really doing that. So instead, Romeo sticks around, and he basically defies the order not to go near Juliet. So it helps prove the point of the story. Let's move on to round two. Round one's obviously the biggest and the most technical part, because it's more analytical. We're getting into the nitty gritty now, and the rules are a bit easier to follow, and we can sort of work through a bit of a checklist and check things quite objectively. This is the stage where we go through the piece line by line. We're examining word usage, we're examining sentence structure, grammar and spelling, adjectives, adverbs, metaphors and similes, and imagery as a whole. And we're going to go through each one, just a little bit on each one. I have more detailed guides as well on my website, which you can go and have a little look at. But this is more just of a checklist, just for you to work through as you're going through your edits. So first of all, word usage, adjectives, adverbs. Let's have a look, because much is spoken about these. Stephen King, we've probably read on writing. He's someone who said that adverbs should never be used, but uses them all the time in his own stories. So you're like, what the hell, Stephen? Adjectives, again, a lot of criticism, but the two of these groups of words have the place, and especially when it comes to creating vivid images in people's minds, especially more for adjectives. So for me, the rule is, if it even is a rule, is it's important how you use them. That's the most important thing. If you throwing needless adjectives in, it's just going to cause bloat, and it's going to slow down the pace of your story. Readers are going to get frustrated, tired, fatigued. We want to be quick, sharp language, just to focus on the parts that we want them to enjoy and focus on, rather than distracting them with the obscenity, the obscene amount, sorry, of adjectives and adverbs in the story. Something I read recently, I think it might have been in Will Storr's book, The Science of Storytelling. I don't know, my shelf there somewhere anyway. Really good book. It looks it looks in depth, sorry, at psychology and storytelling. So if you're looking to learn a bit more about that, definitely check it out. I think it was in his book that he said that when we're describing things, people tend to visualize things better when there are two adjectives. So if I was to say the long coat, that wouldn't leave as much of an image in your mind if I said the long green coat. And I'm guessing you now imagine the long green coat. So yeah, that it does work, and I really like it now. So I'll start using it a bit more. Something else that's tied to this is imagery, and if you're a fan of George Orwell, I really love George Orwell's. He calls them rules for writing, but just tips. Just call them tips because I don't like the word rules when it comes to writing. He's always about creating vivid images in people's minds to help them understand what you're talking about. And when we're doing this, when we're creating images, it makes the story more immersive. One of the best ways to do this is to use the 5 senses. We've already mentioned the 5 senses, but when we are writing poetry, when we're writing prose, sorry, and poetry, if you want, I don't know where poetry came from, but it does help to help your reader draw, help you draw your reader into your world, and make it feel as if they're walking beside your characters. And one of the best ways we can do this is to use language to create that vivid imagery, such that readers almost feel like they're watching a film. Probably one of the reasons why Stephen King's books get made into so many films is because they're quite cinematic in the way that they're written. And we almost feel like we can see everything in our minds. If you want to learn more about the 5 senses, I have a really detailed guide. I think it's about 4,000 words long, so every question imaginable is answered on that, and there's also loads of exercises as well. Always think about how you use the different senses, like the underused senses as well. So touch, smell, in particular, we learn a lot through them kind of things. I gave some examples earlier, so just to give you an idea. Something else that's really important is metaphors and similes, especially if we're trying to explain complex points and we want to make the references more relatable. Again, too many of these can cause problems, but I think a really good metaphor or a really good simile is a work of art. So by all means, enjoy putting them together and include them in your stories. Something else I want to mention is passive voice. I hate passive voice. Not the sort of idea of it as a whole, but I just had a really tough time getting to grips with what it was. Excuse me. Overcome it now. It does take a lot of practice trying to change the style of writing so that you write in the active voice. And when you do it in this way, it makes your story and your writing as a whole more immediate and more gripping. I've got another really detailed guide on what the passive voice is, so there's a link in the description for that. Dialogue. This is a big part of any story, and it's necessary to understand the impact dialogue has. Firstly, it increases the pace. So if you want to exchange a lot of useful information in an engaging way in quite a short space of time, dialogue could be your answer. You can also use dialogue to achieve other things too, like developing your characters, revealing the wider world and the lovely details you create and all that jazz. But dialogue can put readers off if it's done quite badly. And readers know when dialogue is forced, like talking about things that both characters are completely aware of, in great detail as well, for the reader's sake. And the trick I find with that dialogue is it's to be natural, especially to the characters. So another way to look at it is to be oblique, which means don't be as clear with what you're saying. There's a theory that Brandon Sanderson talks about called maid and butler dialogue. So this means that if you were sort of observing a conversation between a maid and a butler as a fly on the wall, you wouldn't really be able to understand everything they were saying, because they'll know the details of their conversation. So they'll be using maybe slang words or code names or different names for referring to people, unique terminologies. And as writers, we may fear that we're going to lose readers, we're going to confuse them, but it can actually have the opposite effect, because when we don't quite understand something, we try to seek out bits of information to help us gain a clear idea of what's going on. So just taking snippets of detail from a conversation can be really engaging. I always think about being on the bus, and if you're ever without your headphones on a bus in Liverpool, you're never short of entertainment, because there's always some mad conversation going on somewhere, and you'll have no idea what's going on, but you'll begin to piece things together, and obviously it's always interesting. Let's just say that. Lastly, something I wanted to mention was syntax and sentence structure. And this is another important consideration to make when it comes to editing, especially when you're looking at pace and structure. So the structure of sentences and paragraphs, they all impact the flow of a story. Short sentences, for example, increase the pace, particularly useful if you're trying to ramp up the tension or explain more complex points. Long sentences have the opposite effect, so they slow down the pace, but they can be quite useful in describing things. Medium length sentences offer a bit of a balance. They sort of temper the two. When you're trying to work out what's short, medium, and long, no real clear guidance on this, so I just sort of go by common sense. I think if a short sentence is going to be anywhere up to 2/3 of a line long, I think that's pretty short up to that point. A medium length sentence is going to be from there up to about 2 lines, maybe a bit shorter than that. And a long sentence is anything over 2 lines. It does help to use a variety of different sentence lengths, especially if you're trying to write with a nice flow. If you use too many similar sentence structures close together, readers pick up on it. They might not understand why, but things will jar, and there won't be as rhythmic a flow as you'd like. I mean, you can even go into more depth about the way you structure your sentences and look at like syllables and stuff like that. Like how many syllables have you used? And I know some authors do, especially in the literary fiction genre. So if you're looking to get into the nitty gritty of that, then I'm sure there's some good examples that you can check out. One of the best things you can do to detect problems with sentence structure, and anything on this screen you can see here, is to read your work aloud. When I first moved in with my girlfriend, she heard me reading my work aloud, and she came into the room and thought I'd gone mad. I always found it a bit uncomfortable reading aloud to myself, but it's so important to hear the words and how they flow. And honestly, you'll be surprised at how much you change, how much you detect as you go through this process. So obviously you don't have to read it out like for the Ian McKellen. You just read it out in your normal voice. You don't have to do accents or anything like that. And if you really feel uncomfortable with it, Microsoft Word has a text-to-speech function, so it'll just read it out for you in a monotone voice, computerized monotone voice. Really helpful. I use it, and I always, any draft, always read aloud. That should be part of your process. Before we move on from these first 2 rounds, which is, let's just say this is the bulk of your editing, I just wanted to tell you how what my process is, because I think it always helps to have an example. So first of all, I begin by printing off the chapter, because it's always good to there's something about a printed page and that just makes things easier. You're not on a computer screen, you can just, I don't know, it just works. What I do then is carry out round one of edits. So I'll use character plotting to map out what happens visually, particularly focusing on emotional peaks and troughs of the characters as they encounter obstacles. I'll look at theme, plot, everything that we discussed. Once I've mapped everything out and I've gone through and I've highlighted what I want to add in and whatnot, what to take out, more importantly. This is where you sort of want to start thinking about the other things like premise and character development, and these are the big analytical questions that you want to sort of focus on, the developmental stage. And then once you've covered all these major points, I then begin reading line by line. So I won't make those changes just yet on the paper. I'll go through again from page 1 on the same page with all my notes on, and I'll just do line edits, because then I can better see where things are. And also, one of the big problems when you're going back and adding things in is once something goes in, that's in first draft form. So if you've got an opportunity to go through once, add bits in, take a step back, come through again. Oh yeah, I'm going to change all these little bits that I've added in. You might add in more, you might make a few changes to how you worded things. So basically you're doing 2 edits, then you're going back to your computer and then making the changes. If I'm doing a novel, I'll do this for each chapter one by one. So each chapter gets 2 rounds of edits, and then it's on to the next one. So it's major points first, / developmental stuff, and then line by line editing. And that is basically rounds 1 and 2. And then we can move on to, I'm sorry, where's round 3? Oh, bugger, I missed the slide out. I'm so sorry. But basically, I'll just tell you what round 3 is, because it's not that complicated. It's this is where you're going for your last checks. So we're doing a proofread essentially. We're going through and just looking for any sort of spelling mistakes, anything like that. So often though, we hit a wall at this stage. We've read the bloody thing so much we hate it. We've become blind to any other potential errors on the page, and yeah, we just need a bit of sort of, the confidence might be waning a bit now. You might be losing a bit of faith, a bit of imposter syndrome might start kicking in. Usually does with me. So I usually need to seek out some sort of reassurance and some sort of external help and support, and that's where I turn to beta readers. And it's frustrating that I've not put this in. I don't know why I haven't. But step 3 on this list, final checks and peer review. And this is what peer review is. It's reaching out to beta readers to see if they're going to read, if they'll read through your book, to give you that impartial feedback that you need. Beta readers, the feedback they give obviously can be immensely helpful. And the more beta readers that help, the better idea you'll have of the strengths and weaknesses of your story. This process helps you fix any issues that may arise so that when you do send off your story to agents and publishers or to publish it yourself, it's in the best shape it can possibly be. The biggest challenge with beta readers is finding them. Who's going to be willing to read your story for free, essentially, and give you feedback? There's a few ways, effective ways of getting beta readers. First one is to connect with fellow authors and offer to beta read their work in exchange for them if you checking yours. This can be achieved by joining writer groups like mine mentioned at the start. There's always people working with each other, posting about looking for beta readers, so you can find beta readers that way. Again, the link is in the description if you want to join. Another way, which I don't think is the best, to be honest, but if you're desperate, go for it, is to ask a family or family member or a friend to read over it. The reason why I don't recommend it is because they just don't want to hurt your feelings. At the end of the day, they're going to be more supportive than they are negative. So you've got to bear that in mind. There are also some paid services for beta reading, but you may as well just go down the working with an editor route if you're gonna do this, because an editor sort of serves that role as well and just minimizes the expense. If you have a following, so if you've got social media following or you've got a mailing list, it doesn't hurt to email them and explain that you're looking for beta readers and invite them to get involved. You may be surprised at the uptake, and you could even offer the people that agree to help you out something in exchange, like a free book or story, anything really. And linked to this point is the creation of beta reading teams. Now, I know a lot of self-published authors who produce a lot of books a year. They'll have a team of beta readers who you work closely with. I've not got one myself, but I'm a slow writer, so I think people will get bored and forget about me. So when it comes to analyzing feedback that you get from beta readers, one of the best approaches I've found comes from Stephen King. He said that if everyone complains about different things, you can probably just investigate each one to see if their complaints hold water. But chances are it's more of a matter of preference. You can't please every reader at the end of the day. And something else I just wanted to say was never take any feedback personally. I mean, sometimes you might just get an asshole who just is laying into you for no reason. That's an exception. But generally, beta readers are there to help. I'd say never disagree with them. I mean, obviously you can disagree with them in just not to the face. Let's just say that. Don't disagree with them to the face, or start any arguments, or obviously explain things if it hasn't been quite clear, and then definitely go back into your story and make sure that things have been explained properly. Just let that person have their opinion at the end of the day. They're entitled to it. You've asked them for it, so don't have a go at them for telling them something that you don't want to hear. At the end of the day, it's your job to decide how to use the feedback, so just hear it out, I suppose. So yeah, that's peer review, and that brings our approach to a close, the 3-round approach. So first of all, analyze the main components: character, conflict, theme, and plot. Use tools like character plotting to help you gain a solid insight. Next, it's line by line, making that prose sing. And lastly, the final checks, the final proofread, and last of all, the peer review and any little changes that you need to make off the back of that. There's some other considerations that I just wanted to discuss with you. Bit ties into some of the other challenges that we highlighted at the beginning, like organisational, motivational as well. So first of all, be realistic with your time and don't rush. I set myself manageable targets that work around my schedule. So some days I don't get anywhere near editing. Other times I have big windows to devote to it, and usually I do the littlest amount possible because when you've got that time, you just procrastinate. I just adjust my targets accordingly, and I don't beat myself up if I don't get around to it, because if you do that, what's the point? You just don't enjoy it. And this will also help you set a realistic timescale for when you're going to finish your project. Second on that list, don't give up. Never ever give up. Editing a novel is a war of attrition. It's not a blitzkrieg. There are going to be times when you just want to give up and move on to something else. Or you just can't face doing it. You just got to power through and be determined to see the project out till the end. And it does get tough, and you may find yourself in a few holes, but remember, there's always a way out. And one of those ways might be a rewrite, which is something you shouldn't be afraid to do, especially if you feel like it's going to make the story better. Yes, it's going to be more work that you don't want to do, but there's nothing worse than putting a book out that you know could have been better. I was in this position with Pariah's Lament, and I had to rewrite the first third of the novel to make it all work. And first of all, I did despair. I probably sulked for about 2 or 3 days, but I did it. And the reason why is because if I didn't, I would have regretted it forever. And remember this, every word is progress. I say this when it comes to writing as well, when you're beating yourself up about getting the words down on the page, every word is progress. And the same applies to editing. Even if you just edit a line or a paragraph a day, that is progress, and you should be proud of every step that you take. So don't beat yourself up for not getting through more. Do what you can and be proud of what you've achieved. Lastly, I'll say this, be organized. Editing is quite a methodical and analytical process, as we've seen. And when it comes to novels, there are many characters and many references to like the likes of places, objects, things like that. It can really help to keep a record of all these things with little explainers as to what they are, just so that you're not wasting time going back through and seeing what you've written down. Also particularly useful if you're writing a story with lots of world building, like a fantasy. And usually what I do in this situation is make a spreadsheet, and I'll have columns for characters, places, objects, and so on. So I'll just take the bit that I've used to describe that character or that place and put it into a spreadsheet. So I've got the reference there. I don't need to, I can see what I've already written for one, so I don't repeat descriptions and stuff. But yeah, so that is a few more considerations. I wanted to just briefly talk about working with editors. We've obviously focused on how to edit ourselves, but there's always the option of reaching out to professional editors too. Firstly, I just wanted to look at the benefits of working with an editor. First of all, you get a set of fresh eyes, which is completely invaluable when it comes to detecting mistakes and ensuring the story works as a whole. If you're looking for different types of editors as well, we went through the terminology at the start. So if you want help with bringing your ideas together, you can look for a developmental editor, or if you're just looking for someone to go through line by line and double check everything's there, copy editor or line editor is what you need. Their professional input as well is going to help you develop your story and make it a better piece as a whole. It's an investment. Think of it like that. It can be expensive, as we'll see, but it is an investment, and that's what you've got to remember. And I've worked with editors as well, and their feedback. The editor for Pariah's Lament, she was the first person to read that book, and to get her feedback, it just gave me confidence. I was like, at least I haven't absolutely balls this up. And that gives you the impetus then to go on and get out of beta readers and get those early reviews in. And these are a few things to keep in mind. So I wanted to talk about the costs, because there are costs involved, and different editors charge different rates depending on what they do and how many words. It usually goes by the number of words that they've got to work with. So as an example, this is a rate I was charged for a bit of editing got done recently. It was 0.012 cents because it was in euros per word. So it doesn't sound like much, but if I think, well, let's see, I asked the editor to do 10,000 words, so that came to 120 euro, which doesn't seem bad, but if the book is it's 100,000 words long, that would have cost me over 1,000 euros. Don't really have that, to be honest. So working with an editor is expensive, and just be mindful of what you want to work with an editor for. If you've nailed your story and it all makes sense, then you're not going to need a developmental editor. But if you're struggling to polish your prose, or if you just want someone to check over for spelling mistakes and grammar, then a line or copy editor is what you may need. If you're looking to find good editors, I recommend checking out freelance websites like Upwork, Fiverr, People Per Hour. It's better to do it like this because it gives you security. First of all, you can check out reviews. So you can see if you've edited similar genres in the past and what other people have thought about their experiences. You also get to see how much they charge. If anything goes wrong and you don't deliver the project or they renege on what they've agreed, then you've got a bit of protection. You can put a complaint in, you can leave a negative review. There's a chance you might even get your money back. So that's why I always recommend going through these websites as opposed to just approaching people directly on social media and stuff like that when you don't really know much about them. That's just my preference, though. I'm risk averse. Right, lastly, some editorial tools. Firstly, I just wanted to say something about Grammarly. Grammarly is something that we're using for my job, and it's good. I quite like Grammarly. It just works as a plugin for your web browser or your word processing software like Microsoft Word, and it's just like a better version of, well, a better version of Microsoft Word sort of spell checker. It highlights spelling, grammatical errors. Usually it gets them right. Sometimes it can help with other things such as clarity, word usage and tone, all quite important. I use the Grammarly free version. I mean, I have access to the premium version in work, but I don't use it, funnily enough, just because there's not much difference. I don't really need help with the extra bits that it offers, the premium version. So the free one's more than adequate. And to make up for things that the Grammarly premium version offers, you can use something called Hemingway. This is brilliant. You just literally paste it into, it's like an online platform. So you just paste it into that and it'll highlight adjectives, adverbs, any sort of instances of passive voice. It doesn't make suggestions, it just highlights them. But to be honest, that can save time in itself because it'll pick up on things that you may miss. Lastly, bit of a weird one, but Google Docs. As an editor, Google Docs is so helpful. First of all, the spell checker is not bad. So as a first sort of line of defense against the old typo, I think Google Docs is pretty good. Then you can use something like Grammarly as like a second filter. Another benefit to Google Docs is its safety features because it's all stored in the cloud. So it's not on a computer, it's not on a device. So if anything happens to them, they go missing or stolen or lost. Stolen or lost or missing. Repeating myself. So if anything happens to your device or your computer, then there's a backup there, and it saves after every word you type or change. So you don't even have to worry about clicking Control S or closing the window because it's just there. And there's also, it stores revision histories. So if you do make any changes, you can go back and restore it to what it was, and you can work collaboratively on documents. So if you're working with an editor, they can just go in, like track changes on Microsoft Word, but with Microsoft Word, you have to change everything manually, whereas in Google Docs, you can just go accept the changes, and that'll save you hours and hours. So as an editor, I always use Google Docs. I think it's great. So that's it. That's how we edit a novel. Well, that's how I do it anyway. If you want more writing tips, go to my website, richiebilling.com. Join us in our writing group as well. Ask any questions you like. There's hundreds of us in there now, growing all the time. Really nice people, really funny bunch of people as well. So if you're into your writing humor, then yeah, by all means, come and share some memes galore. If you did enjoy this workshop, if you found it useful, I would really appreciate if you left a quick review on Trustpilot. Trustpilot is a brilliant platform for people to leave honest, genuine reviews, really respected by Google and consumers alike. So it only takes a second to leave a review, and it would be more than enough compensation for me for doing this free workshop for you if you left a quick review. So thank you if you do go on to leave a review. I really do appreciate it. If you do want more workshops, more resources, there is a bit of a fantasy focus. Head over to Patreon and see what we've got on offer there. And yeah, we've got a podcast as well, the Fantasy Writers Toolshed. So episodes go out every 2 weeks. So yeah, if you join my mailing list, I email every episode every 2 weeks, so you won't miss any. Cover all types of writing, particularly getting specialists in the field now. So we're getting psychologists on, sociologists, all to help with the process of creating characters, for example. Got historians on to talk about medieval history, to give you ideas for your stories. There's loads going on. So yeah, follow us on Spotify, iTunes, whatnot. And that's enough now for talking from me. It's time to you. It's over to you guys. And question and answer time. There's big George R.R. Martin there, looking all hip. So yeah, ask me anything. I just realised that my mic was muted the whole time. Jesus Christ! I'll start again. Thanks so much anyway for tuning in. Today it was brilliant to have you. So many people. I think it's over 350 people booked into this, which absolutely blew me away. And I'm just delighted that so many of you found it useful. If you do want more help and support, you can join our writing groups. Loads of people have joined Discord and on Facebook as well, just while this has gone live. So yes, really exciting to have you all on board. Zero Oscar, I think it is. Sorry, I'm not very great shit at reading their usernames. But yeah, so what's the single most common area you spot? Passive voice is definitely the biggest one because yeah, I think when I'm working with writers in work, you get a lot of new writers, and they'll always fall into this trap of writing in a passive way. Luckily, we have checkers, so we can detect it, and then we just help them through it. Usually, I just send them a guide on passive voice, and just really challenge them. I think one of the best things, if you really want a basic sort of way of getting rid of passive voice, is to just look for to be verbs. So if you click on my guide, I think the link is in the description, and look for that list of like is, was, am, were, these kind of words. If you just look out for them in your sentences and think of ways to get rid of them, usually you can turn your writing from passive to active. Any more questions? Oh, the book I'm currently editing. So I've in the middle of writing or editing a novel called Atlanta, and it's I suppose it's a high fantasy, and I describe it as a mix. Well, Lord of the Rings meets The Mandalorian. So I wanted to create my own version of orcs. So I'm quite excited to reveal what they're actually like. And as the story goes on, it follows this young mother who's been widowed. Her husband died in the war. The war's still raging. And we can honestly relate a lot to what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, written from someone a perspective. It's not inspired by. It's actually inspired by the migrant crisis and seeing people make these incredible journeys with massive risks. So with this young mother, she's got a 3-month-old daughter, decides to cross the war-torn land to make it to the border and try and find a better life. So it's been really cool editing this because there is a lot of conflict. It doesn't really feel like it stops, which is also a concern because sometimes you can leave readers breathless, especially if it's over like 100,000 words. So yeah, it's been quite quite interesting anyway. So let me see. Question. I'm glad you can all hear me now. Yeah, right. I've got another question here from Ellen. How to realise and accept that your piece may be unsalvageable. Yeah, this happened to me. I really do relate to this because when I was writing Briar's Lament, I got about a third of the way or halfway through and then realised that the first third of the story needed to be changed. It was quite gut wrenching. I think I sulked for about a week and then decided, well, try to think of a way to fix it. And yeah, I couldn't salvage much of it. I just had to delete it and really start again. But because I knew the reason why I was sulking is because I knew I had to do it. I just didn't want to. It was a massive job, especially after spending all that time writing it. But if I hadn't done it, I would have always regretted it. And I think the story is much better as a result. So yeah, sometimes you just gotta crack on. We've got another question here from Janine. What can you do if you feel like you're in a years-long rewriting loop? I think there comes a point, if you haven't already done this, to get help from beta readers, because
yeah, you might just need that extra insight, and eventually you've just got to make a decision. You've got to decide, this is it. No, I've had enough. Like that's what happened with Prize Event. I think you can always change something. The more every time you read it, you'll want to change something that you find, and you've just got to decide enough's enough. And by the end of it, I was really fed up of reading the story. I physically couldn't bring myself to do it again, and just sent it off and hope for the best. And if it is really bad, it starts going out to the wider public, you can always take it off the market or whatever and fix the problems and release a second edition. So worst comes to the worst, there's always a way out of things. And I think if you feel like you're in a loop and you're not getting anywhere, try and make a definitive choice about where you want to go. Do you want to get outside help before you release it, or do you just want to, if you've done that already, you just want to go for it? When should we go to betas after edits only, from Isabella? That's a good question. I suppose beta readers is just one type of reader. You've also got alpha readers, which is, I think, something I briefly mentioned. And this is just where you'd ask your readers to read your story at a much earlier stage. So you might, for example, bring them in after maybe the second or third draft, or maybe even earlier. I've never used an alpha reader, so I couldn't really say. But it is designed to be quite early. So beta readers, I would say, are towards the end, and then you've got alpha readers, who would come in much earlier. Let's see if we've got any other questions. How did you think of conflict that is authentic? That's a really good question, miniaturist. So, like I said, there's all different types of conflict. So, you obviously have the physical obstacles, there's other people, and there's also the internal ones as well. And sometimes the internal ones are the most powerful. So, if you're ever really unsure about introducing some kind of conflict, I think just have a think about, like, from an external perspective, have a think about who your character is, and what their challenges are, what's holding them back. And I think that will help you if you ever get stuck, because your character is what drives the story forward, and you can, as things go on and as they interact with the conflict in the story, there's going to be problems. Yeah, so I hope that helps. I'm working on, from Jordan, I'm working on flash fictions to get over my half finished stories. Yeah, I have this problem too, Jordan, to be totally honest. I keep thinking, coming up with like short story ideas, and then it's like, oh, actually, I'll just be accused of writing like first chapters and stuff like that. So I do relate to that. I think my biggest weakness with short stories is always the structure. Like I always have trouble finding the sort of perfect balance between like the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I'm better writing novels, I think. I hope anyway. I just feel more comfortable doing that, I suppose. But short stories, I do find it quite difficult. And yeah, so that's always my problem, is finding the not to write sort of prologues and stuff. So how to avoid it? I think for me, when I'm thinking about short stories now, I just try and think of a snapshot in a person's life. So a defining moment, that like an instance in their life where things change. So with the last short story I wrote, it was a fantasy one. I was quite happy with it because there was obviously what I revealed in 3,000 words was that this character had a story that preceded where we begin, and he's got a history and he's alive. And at that moment in time where we take it up, he's having a bit of a shit time, and there's a lot of bad things happening in his life. But something weird's just happened as well that he's got to go and investigate. Um, yeah, so lost place there. Sorry. So what I decided to do then, it was like he as he sort of navigates his way through this little story and overcomes the challenges at the end, he returns to the beginning, or where to face. It just ends there essentially, but I give the reader an idea of what's going to happen next, and that is that he's going to go down and face his fears. He's going to go back down the hill after overcoming. It's like a bit of a coming of an age story, but it's a very short one, and that's what I was trying to do. Just sort of reveal a defining moment in this character's life that hopefully doesn't make it go on too long. But yeah, hope that helps. I waffled a bit there, sorry. That's great news here, Trevor. Hannah asked, how do you know what to write? I don't know. I think if you're ever struggling with ideas, I mean, I come up with like plot points mostly. I'm not really someone who comes up with characters. Sometimes people just like create a character, like a really memorable character. I think a good idea is like Coat by Patrick Rothfuss. I think he came up with the character first. I don't know if I'm remembering that right, and sort of built a story around the character that created this really interesting, fascinating, and intriguing person. But you could just sort of build it off an idea or a world that you've created that you want to populate with stories. So I think if you yeah, there will be slides as well, by the way. I think a couple of people have asked that question, so I'll just jump in there and say, yeah, I'll email you a copy of the slides, no problem. Yeah, so just going back to that question. And then if you just find something that interests you and excites you, and that's what I found with Atlanta. I think with Atlanta, the inspiration came from seeing something in the real world that made me feel something. Like I was really angry that all this was happening, like allowed to happen, and that people weren't being helped, and it was very inhuman, and there was no consideration given to the process or the journey that those unfortunate people came to before he died or had a terrible journey and eventually made it. But yeah, it's just got to look around for inspiration and see what piques your interest, and then always look for conflict and see. I just think, what is this character, or what could be the end result of this, and what can you put in between to make it that end as difficult as possible to get to. Dylan has asked. I think, Dylan, that's a great question because it's something I like to do. I like to read. If I read something, I always remember David Gemmell's Legend, and if you read the first page of that book, there's a description of someone entering a tavern. Seems like a classic scene in fantasy, but that just grabbed me. It was so beautifully written, and it just set you just in the tavern with the characters, and yeah, so that's what I did. I felt amazed by what I just read. So I went back and I was like, how the hell did he do that? And then I was looking at sentence structure. I mean, there was a lot of imagery in there, so metaphors and similes, like really break down and analyze what elements they've included and how they've structured it. So look at sentence length, whether they've used commas, because commas and sentence length and things like that, they give you your flow. And if your prose has a nice flow, it's quite easy to read, then it grabs people. So particularly with early well, any kind of prose, like you want to try and get the imagery. If it's more if you can imagine it more, it's more immersive. So I think yeah, just try and break down as much as you can. Like when the more you edit, and like hopefully the things that you've learned today will give you an idea of what to look for when you do go and like analytically read other writers. Right, I think that is all the questions. Does anyone have any more? If not, I do really appreciate you coming along. It's been fantastic spending the evening with you all and chatting about writing, because it's um, it's something I really enjoy, and I want to do more of these workshops. I just need the time to be on my side. If you did enjoy this, I would honestly be so grateful if you left a review on Trustpilot. I've left the link in the chat there. I did answer your questions, Janine, so if you jump back a little bit, you should be able to find the answer. But if anyone does have any questions, yeah, I'll hang on for another minute if anyone does. Well, I think that's it, everyone. It's been lovely again chatting with you tonight. I'm going to send an email around. You'll have the slides, and you'll get the link again. Through the link, you can access all the resources. So, yeah, thanks very much, and have a great night or rest of the day wherever you're at.